Growing up in a family that prized independence, I was always encouraged to solve problems on my own. My father, a carpenter, would often involve me in his projects, showing me how to measure, cut, and build with precision. "You don't need fancy degrees to make a good living," he used to say. "What you need is skill and dedication." Those words became a mantra that shaped my view of success. The small-town atmosphere I called home was both a blessing and a challenge. Everyone knew everyone else, and reputations were built or broken on the smallest of actions. This environment instilled a strong sense of accountability in me from an early age. If I said I'd do something, I made sure to follow through because trust was the most valuable currency in our community. In high school, I discovered a knack for fixing things. Whether it was repairing a broken fence for a neighbor or troubleshooting a malfunctioning lawnmower, I found immense satisfaction in solving practical problems. These small victories didn't just earn me extra pocket money. They also solidified my belief that hands-on work could lead to a fulfilling career. One defining moment came during a summer storm when our basement flooded. Watching my father and a local plumber work together to clear the water and repair the damaged pipes left a lasting impression on me. The plumber, a gruff but kind man named Mr. Grayson, explained every step of the process with a patience that belied his rugged appearance. "Plumbing's not just about pipes," he said. "It's about keeping homes safe and lives comfortable." That interaction sparked an interest that stayed with me. I began reading about the trade, fascinated by the complexity hidden beneath the simplicity of running water. It seemed like a puzzle waiting to be solved, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wanted to be a part of it. By the time I graduated, I knew college wasn't my path. While my friends packed their bags for universities across the state, I felt drawn to a more immediate and tangible career. Plumbing isn't glamorous, but it offered stability, purpose, and the chance to build something meaningful from the ground up. As fate would have it, my growing interest aligned perfectly with an opportunity that came my way. Matt, a close friend, mentioned that his uncle Steve, a seasoned plumber, was looking for apprentices. The timing couldn't have been better, and before I knew it, I was stepping into a world of wrenches, pipes, and problem-solving. A world that would soon become my passion. Matt and I had been inseparable since childhood, forging a friendship built on shared mischief and mutual understanding. We weren't scholars by any stretch, but we had an uncanny knack for navigating life's twists and turns with a mix of creativity and sheer determination. One evening during our late teens, we found ourselves discussing the weighty topic of our futures. Neither of us fancied the idea of drowning in student loans or chasing degrees we weren't passionate about. Instead, we set our sights on a more practical path, learning a trade. Plumbing became the clear choice when Matt's uncle Steve, a seasoned professional, offered to take us under his wing. Steve's proposal wasn't entirely altruistic. Training us meant he could save on labor costs, but it was a win-win situation. He planned to retire soon and spend his golden years soaking up Florida's sun. For us, it was a golden opportunity to gain valuable skills and build a future without the financial burden of traditional education. Matt, ever the dreamer, had a vision of taking over the business one day, maybe even with me as his partner and building it into something bigger. With that goal in mind, we signed up as Steve's apprentices. The pay was lousy, but the experience was invaluable. We had direction, but life still had plenty of lessons to throw our way. Those early years were full of learning experiences, not just in plumbing but in life. We navigated the usual teenage challenges, dealing with relationships, friendships, and figuring out what loyalty really meant. One thing was clear: Matt and I were a team. Anyone who messed with one of us had to deal with both. We weren't huge guys, but we built up strength from sports and knew how to handle ourselves. I'll never forget the day our bond was truly sealed. I was cornered by two football players who decided to give me a hard time. Out of nowhere, Matt charged in, fists flying, and together we took them down. From that moment, no one dared challenge us again. When it came to girls, Matt was a natural charmer. He loved keeping things casual and always had a new girl on his arm. I was the opposite. My name's Jim, by the way. During our apprenticeship with Steve, I met Kate. We connected instantly when we met at a bar, and before long, we were inseparable. What started as a spark quickly grew into a full-blown relationship, and we realized we were a perfect match in every way. As Kate and I grew closer, Matt started to feel left out. He missed having me as his wingman, but he was happy for me too. "You got a good thing going, Jim," he said one day. "If you hadn't met her first, I'd have loved to see where things might have gone with Kate." Despite the awkwardness, the three of us got along so well that we felt like family. Matt and Kate even hugged occasionally, but I never gave it much thought. After all, you trust your best friend, right? Life moved on, and so did Uncle Steve. He sold the business to Matt and me when he retired. My parents co-signed a loan to help me buy my share, while Matt's parents gave him the money outright. That left me carrying the debt, but I didn't mind. Things were going well. I married Kate 2 years ago, and the business thrived. We poured our energy into marketing and built a strong online presence. Soon, we had more clients than we could handle. The workload became overwhelming, and we realized we needed more plumbers. Unfortunately, finding skilled workers at reasonable rates was tough. Matt and I started working even longer hours. Meanwhile, Kate was stuck in a job she hated, working as a legal clerk. The pay was fine, but she had to deal with a persistent coworker who constantly hit on her. She wanted to start a family, but with my debt and the endless work hours, it felt impossible to make that happen. As my schedule grew more demanding, Kate seemed to drift away. She was clearly unhappy, and I started to worry about her mental health. I tried to reassure her, saying, "Things won't always be this crazy, just hang in there." But my words didn't seem to help. Then, out of nowhere, she changed. It was like someone flipped a switch. Kate suddenly seemed lighter and happier, and the tension that had weighed her down was gone. At first, I was just relieved to see her smile again. But as time passed, I started noticing things. Our once dormant bed life became unexpectedly passionate. Kate started suggesting things in the bedroom that she'd never shown interest in before. I couldn't help but wonder what sparked this transformation. I needed someone to talk to, so I turned to Matt. We met at a bar, grabbed a couple of beers, and found a quiet booth. "You've seemed off lately," Matt said. "What's going on?" "It's Kate," I replied. "She hated her job, especially because of this coworker at work." Then suddenly, she's all smiles, and our bed life has taken a strange turn. She's trying new things, and I can't help but wonder, where is this coming from? Is she learning it from someone else? For the briefest moment, something flickered across Matt's face, an expression he quickly buried. "You're overthinking it, Jim," he said, but his words only deepened my suspicions about Kate and about Matt. That Saturday morning, I decided it was time to face the truth, head on. Over breakfast, I calmly said, "I've got a packed schedule today. Tons of work. I'll be gone all day. Perfect chance for you to invite your lover over." Kate froze, the color draining from her face. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't hold back. "You know who I mean, the guy who seems obsessed with getting his personal desires fulfilled. Care to explain?" Tears immediately welled in her eyes, and she bolted from the kitchen, running to the bedroom without a word. I grabbed my keys and walked out to my truck, pretending I had a full day's work ahead of me. But I wasn't going anywhere far. I had no real plans other than to let Kate believe I was gone long enough for her to take the bait. It was a calculated move, and I was almost certain she'd fall for it. When I returned just before lunch, my suspicions were confirmed. Matt's truck was parked in the driveway. My stomach churned, and my pulse raced. I had suspected this, but seeing his truck made it impossible to deny. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut, but anger quickly replaced the shock. Slamming my truck door, I stomped to the front door. unlocking it with shaky hands. The scene inside wasn't quite what I'd imagined, though it didn't make it any less enraging. Instead of catching them in bed, I found them sitting awkwardly on opposite ends of the couch. A tissue box sat between them, and the floor was scattered with crumpled tissues. Both of their faces were red and puffy, like they'd been crying for hours. But their remorse didn't move me. It only fueled my anger. As soon as I stepped into the room, Matt stood up, raising his hands as if to pacify me. "Jim, listen," he began, but he didn't get the chance to finish. I closed the distance between us in an instant, landing a solid punch on his face. He stumbled backward, falling to the floor with blood pouring from his nose and mouth. "Don't even try, Matt. You're no friend of mine. You're nothing." I turned to Kate, my fury boiling over. "And you," I spat, pointing at her. "Start packing. I want you out of my house today." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to respond. "Jim, please, let me explain." "Shut your mouth," I roared, cutting her off before she could continue. "There's nothing you can say that I want to hear. Don't insult me with your lies. Grab your things and get out. The rest, I'll pack it myself and leave it at your office. Your new boyfriend can pick it up." Kate stood frozen for a moment, then hurried to the bedroom to gather her belongings. I turned my attention back to Matt, who had managed to crawl to the couch, pressing tissues against his bleeding nose. "You're leaving too," I said coldly. "Get out of my house now." A few minutes later, Kate emerged, her face streaked with tears, carrying a small bag. She avoided looking at me as she headed for the door. Matt tried to speak again, but I didn't let him. Instead, I drove my fist into his gut, making him double over in pain. "Out both of you," I growled, my voice low but menacing. Matt staggered to his feet, still clutching his stomach, and followed Kate out the door. I stood in the doorway, watching them climb into Matt's truck. Neither of them dared to look back as they drove away. The moment they were gone, I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. The sound echoed in the silence of the empty house. That afternoon, I sat down to figure out my next steps. I started researching divorce proceedings and how to dissolve the business partnership with Matt. The divorce itself seemed straightforward. No kids, no shared assets beyond our rented house, and separate car loans. The business, however, was more complicated. I still owed a significant amount on the loan I'd taken to buy my share, while Matt had no financial burden thanks to his parents. The thought of dealing with him in any capacity made my blood boil, but I needed a plan. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer, Karen King, and explained the situation. Karen suggested involving her husband, Carl, who specialized in business law. Since Matt was part of both the divorce and the business, it made sense to tackle everything at once. In our meeting, Karen laid out the basics. "The divorce shouldn't be too complex," she said. "Your prenup ensures that the business remains separate from marital assets, so that won't be contested. The real challenge is the partnership." Carl took over, leaning forward. "Jim, you need to decide what you want. Do you want to preserve the business, or are you ready to walk away? Either choice is valid, but it changes how we proceed." "I want out," I said without hesitation. "I'm done." Carl nodded. "In that case, you can sell your share. If you want to minimize damage, sell it to Matt, but make him pay for it. If you'd rather make things difficult for him, you could sell your half to a competitor. They'd likely dissolve the business, claim its assets, and remove Matt from the market. However, that option could hurt your employees." The mention of our team gave me pause. We had 5 solid workers, people I respected and didn't want to see suffer because of this mess. "I can't just walk away," I said finally. "My parents co-signed my loan. I won't leave them holding the debt." "I understood," Carl replied. "We'll serve Matt notice of your intention to dissolve the partnership. He'll have 30 days to make an offer to buy you out. As for the divorce, we'll make sure Kate gets served at work. That should send a clear message." For several days, I cut myself off from the outside world. Calls and emails from Matt flooded in. but I ignored every single one. He whined about missed jobs and angry clients, but his problems were no longer my concern. To hammer the point home, I sent both him and Kate the same picture, a shot of my middle finger accompanied by the words, "Go to hell." By the third evening, they made a fatal misstep. Kate let herself and Matt into my house using her key, a move that ignited my rage the moment I heard the door creak open. Without waiting for an explanation, I charged into the living room. My anger erupted in a flurry of punches aimed at Matt. "Jim, stop. Let's talk," Matt pleaded, raising his hands to shield himself as my fists landed. His nose broke with a sickening crunch, blood gushing as he stumbled backward. "Jim, please stop," Kate cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. I turned on her, cold and unyielding. "Matt is never setting foot in this house again, and you forfeited any claim to it." I spat, pointing at her. "Since you thought it was okay to use your key, you can hand it over, right now." Her hands trembled as she removed the key from her ring and placed it in my outstretched palm. "If you have anything to say to me, you can arrange a meeting through my lawyer," I added, my voice cutting, "and don't bother showing up if he's there. Now get out." I looked back at Matt, whose bloodied face only fueled my disgust. "As for you, be at the office tomorrow morning at 8. We'll settle this in front of the staff. Oh, and just so you know, I've already spoken to Cooper's Plumbing. They're ready to buy my share of the business." Matt's expression darkened, but he stayed silent. The two of them shuffled out without another word, and I locked the door behind them. If they hadn't understood the depth of my fury before, they surely did now. They'd taken everything from me, but I was determined to make them pay. That night, I made it clear to the world what had happened. I updated my Facebook status to separated and unleashed a scathing post. "It's time to set the record straight. My wife, Kate, and my so-called best friend, Matt, have been having an affair. They betrayed me in the worst possible way. A wife cheating with her husband's business partner. Effective immediately, I've thrown her out of my house, and I'll be cutting all ties with both of them. The divorce is in motion, and I'm selling my share of the business. If you consider yourself my friend, do me a favor. Never mention their names around me again. They're dead to me." The post spread like wildfire. My phone blew up with messages and notifications, but I ignored most of them. One call, however, caught my attention. Kate's father, James. Out of respect, I decided to answer. "Jim," he began, his tone filled with regret. "I heard about everything. This is awful. Is there anything I can do to help?" "James, I appreciate the call," I replied. "But there's nothing anyone can do to fix this. If you want to help, encourage Kate to finalize the divorce quickly so we can all move on. She's staying with us tonight." He admitted softly. "She's devastated, Jim. She says she made a horrible mistake and that she still loves you. Would you be willing to talk to her?" "No," I said firmly. "She knows the only way I'll talk to her is through my lawyer. There's nothing left to say. I'll never forgive her, James." He sighed, the sadness evident in his voice. "I understand. I just wanted to try. I'm truly sorry this happened, Jim. You deserve better." "Thank you, James," I said. "And thank Martha as well. You've both been good to me. And I'm sorry it's ending like this. Take care." The next morning I arrived at the office at 8 a.m. sharp and gathered the staff for a meeting. Matt sat stiffly, his bruised and bloodied face a testament to the night before. I stood in front of the room, letting the tension build for a moment before speaking. "Let me cut to the chase," I began, my tone cold. "Matt and Kate have been having an affair. If any of you knew about this and kept it from me, there will be consequences." A wave of shock rippled through the room as I continued. "Here's what's happening. I'm selling my share of the business. Cooper's Plumbing is interested, and if they buy, this company may shut down. I can't promise anything about your jobs, but I'll do what I can to make the transition smooth. You all deserve better than this mess." The staff left in silence, leaving only Matt and me in the room. He glared at me, his jaw tight. "Did you have to air our dirty laundry to everyone? You've made this 1,000,000 times worse." I let out a bitter laugh. "You think I care about your feelings? You destroyed everything, and now you're upset that people know the truth. Grow up, Matt." "Jim, listen," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Kate doesn't even want me. She loves you. I don't want her either. I'm not looking to settle down. Can't we just put this behind us and focus on the business?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You seriously think I'd stay in business with you after this? The clock's ticking. You've got less than a month to buy me out or Cooper's will take over. I don't care what happens to this place anymore." "Jim, please," he started, but I cut him off. "I'm done," I said firmly, turning to leave. As I walked out the door, I raised my middle finger in the air. That was my answer. Later that day, my lawyer informed me that Kate wanted to set up a meeting. She planned to bring her father and a lawyer, the same persistent coworker who'd hit on her at work. It was unbelievable how far she'd fallen. Still, I agreed. I had no intention of reconciling, but if she wanted to talk, I'd face her one last time. The next morning, I arrived early to meet with my lawyer, Karen. Her advice was simple. Let the other side speak first and reveal their hand. When Kate arrived, she could barely meet my eyes. Her father, James, was composed as always. He extended his hand and said, "Jim, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I hope you can keep an open mind." I shook his hand. "It's always good to see you, James, though I wish the circumstances were different." My attention shifted to Kate's lawyer, and my mood soured instantly. His smug demeanor and self-assured grin were enough to set me on edge. He introduced himself, offering a handshake. "Let's get this nonsense resolved so you two can work things out," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I gripped his hand firmly, locking eyes with him. "That's not going to happen, Gibson," I said sharply, using his last name to keep things formal. "I've never met you, but I've heard about you, particularly the times you hit on my wife. Let's keep this professional. You may address me as Mr. Wilson." I let go of his hand, and his confident smirk faltered. Karen stepped in with her trademark professionalism. "Mrs. Wilson, please explain why you called this meeting. The divorce terms are equitable, and Mr. Wilson has made it clear that reconciliation is not an option after such an egregious breach of trust." Kate opened her mouth to respond, but Gibson interjected. "That's quite the exaggeration." I cut him off, my voice steely. "It's not an exaggeration, it's the truth. Are you here to contribute to this discussion, or to waste our time?" Kate finally found her voice. "Please, everyone, let me speak. I called this meeting because I don't want a divorce. I still love my husband, despite my mistakes. Jim, please, just sit down and talk to me. Let me explain." I was about to shut her down when James gently intervened. "Jim," he said, his voice calm and steady, "please, just hear her out. Let the two of you talk alone. That's all I ask. If it doesn't change anything, I won't interfere again." James had always treated me with respect, as had his wife, Martha. I couldn't refuse him outright. "All right, James," I said reluctantly. "I'll have one conversation with her, out of respect for you and Martha, not for her. But don't expect me to change my mind." Karen chimed in, her tone measured. "Legally, there's no issue with the two of you meeting privately. However, I recommend addressing any objections to the divorce terms now, so we're clear on where we stand if the discussion proves unproductive. Does your client have any objections, Gibson?" Gibson hesitated. "No objections at this time, but my client reserves the right to request court-ordered counseling." Karen nodded. "Noted. If there's nothing further, this meeting is adjourned." As we wrapped up, James approached me again. "Thank you, Jim. I truly appreciate this," he said sincerely. I nodded, though the sting of betrayal made his gratitude hard to bear. "You're a good man, James," I said. "I'll speak with her tomorrow, but it won't change anything." I informed Kate that her belongings were packed and ready for pickup the next evening. She could come at 5 p.m., accompanied by her father if she wished. The following evening, the doorbell rang right on time. Kate stood there, nervous and fidgeting, while James waited in the car. I led her to the dining room, choosing the most formal and impersonal space in the house. She sat across from me, her discomfort palpable. "What do you want to say, Kate?" I asked, my tone distant and cold. She hesitated before speaking, her voice trembling. "That I love you, Jim. That I was in a terrible place. I hated my job, hated my boss, who is now my lawyer, by the way, and hated that you were always working late. I know you were doing it for us, to secure our future, but I felt so alone." Her words barely registered. "So you're saying it's my fault? That you fell into Matt's bed by accident?" I snapped, my voice cutting. "No, that's not what I'm saying," she insisted, tears brimming in her eyes. "I was depressed, Jim. I saw Dr. Sharp, and he prescribed antidepressants, but I was too ashamed to take them. I felt like a failure. I had a wonderful husband and a good life, but I was falling apart. I wanted to start a family, but you said it wasn't the right time. I felt trapped." She paused, her voice breaking. "Then one night, Matt called. I told him you were working late again, and he was surprised. He said you shouldn't have to work so much if you were the boss. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Were you really working late, or was there someone else?" Her words stung, but she kept going. I was already spiraling, and that thought broke me. When Matt came over, I was a mess. I cried, and he comforted me like a friend. But then I kissed him. I started it, Jim, not him, and things went too far. Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. "We tried to stop, twice. We both agreed we couldn't do this to you. But I kept going back. My depression took over, and I clung to the comfort he gave me. That day you came home early. We hadn't done anything. We just decided to end it for good. And then you walked in." She looked at me, her expression a mixture of regret and desperation. "Jim, I know I can't undo the damage I caused. I know I've lost your trust. But I love you, please. Give us another chance." I stared at her, unmoved. Her words were little more than noise to me, hollow and devoid of meaning. She must have realized her plea had failed because her gaze held no hope, only quiet acceptance. It didn't matter what she said. The reality was clear. The so-called cure for her depression had been my best friend. That was her excuse, her justification, and it was laughable. "You've got a twisted way of showing love, Kate," I said. My voice was as flat as my feelings for her. "Not a single thing you've said makes this easier to stomach. You betrayed me with someone I trusted most. Both of you are disgusting, and I want you out of my life." Her tears began again, but I felt nothing. "Just sign the divorce papers," I continued. "Let's get this over with. There's no forgiveness, no path forward. You cheated with Matt, my best friend. Do you even understand what that means? It's done, Kate. Finished." She sobbed quietly, but I kept going. "I never thought I could stop loving you, but you've managed to make me feel nothing but disgust. You repulse me. I'll never look back on this marriage with anything but regret." Standing up, I signaled the end of the conversation. I escorted her to the door as she trembled with grief. Her father, James, waited in the car, and when our eyes met, I gave him a small, regretful shake of my head. He sighed and stepped out, wrapping his arms around Kate as he murmured something to calm her. James returned to help load the last of her belongings into the car. Kate remained inside, crying softly while we worked in silence. When everything was packed, he turned to me and extended his hand. "Thank you, Jim," he said quietly. I shook his hand, struggling with the unexpected lump in my throat. Saying goodbye to this decent man hurt more than letting go of his daughter. He hadn't deserved any of this. "Take care, James," I replied. "You're a good man." Once they were gone, I turned my focus to Matt. Halfway through the 30 days I'd given him to buy me out, he called. I didn't want to answer, but with employees counting on us and unfinished business to handle, I picked up. "What is it, Matt?" I said, my tone sharp. "If this isn't about the buyout, I'm hanging up," he replied. "It is," he said quickly. "I've been to the bank. How much do you want for your share?" $200,000, I replied flatly. "What? That's double what you paid," he protested. "Be reasonable, Jim. I can't afford that. You know how tight things are." "Are you serious, Matt?" I snapped. "This isn't something you can fund with the company's cash flow. You need to raise the money. Sell assets, take out a loan. I don't care how. You're buying me out, not stealing from me." "Come on, Jim," he pleaded. "I'm sorry, okay? But if you don't work with me, the business will collapse." I laughed bitterly. "That's the idea, Matt. $200,000 is what Cooper's Plumbing offered me. If you can't match it, I'm selling to them." A week later, he called again. "Jim, the best I can do is $180,000. Can we work something out?" I hung up. As the deadline approached, he called once more. "Fine," he said, defeated. $200,000. I'll pay it." I didn't respond immediately. "Jim," he shouted, "what's the problem?" "I'll pay your price," I said. "That's Cooper's bid, Matt," I replied. "You need to beat it." "For God's sake, Jim," he groaned. "Fine. How much more?" $200,005. I said, "Take it or leave it." "Fine," he muttered bitterly. "You win." By the deadline, the payment was made, and my lawyer confirmed that the deal was final. I was officially out. No more, Matt. No more partnership. No more ties to this betrayal. It was time to move forward. Months passed before I finally got a court date for the divorce. I hoped it would be a clean end to this nightmare. Things started smoothly. Both sides agreed to the terms, but then Kate's lawyer, Gibson, disrupted the process. "Your Honor," he said, "my client requests court-ordered counseling." My frustration boiled over. "You've got to be kidding me," I blurted, earning a sharp reprimand from the judge. "Mr. Wilson," the judge warned, "keep your language appropriate in this court. Your attorney may respond." Karen stood calm and composed. "Your Honor, counseling is entirely unnecessary. This case involves a severe breach of trust. Mrs. Wilson engaged in an affair with my client's best friend. Mr. Wilson has made it abundantly clear there is no possibility of reconciliation. Counseling would be a waste of resources." The judge turned to Gibson. "Does your client wish to address the court?" Kate stood, visibly frail, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, I know what I did was unforgivable. I've lost my husband's love, and it's tearing me apart. I just want a chance to show him how much I care. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I need him to know how much he means to me." Her words were raw, filled with regret. "I've been on antidepressants, but nothing helps. I feel like my life is falling apart. All I want is to fix this, to be the wife he deserves. Please give me that chance." The judge leaned back, considering her plea. "Mrs. Wilson," he said finally, "your pain is evident, and I don't doubt your sincerity. But counseling requires the participation of both parties. Mr. Wilson, are you willing to attend counseling?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "No, Your Honor, I will not attend counseling or pursue reconciliation. This marriage is over." The judge sighed, his tone somber. "Understood. Divorce granted. No counseling will be ordered." And with that, it was done. 3 weeks later, an unexpected call from James interrupted my quiet evening. His voice was tense, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Jim, it's James. Can you come to the hospital? I sat up straight, my chest tightening. "What's going on? Why are you calling me?" "It's Kate," he said, his voice cracking. "She's not doing well. The doctors, they don't think she'll make it. She's asking for you." The words hit me like a hammer, leaving me momentarily speechless. Part of me wanted to ask why he thought I should be involved, but the desperation in his voice stopped me short. "I'll be there," I said finally. At the hospital, I approached the reception desk, my nerves fraying. "I'm here for Kate Wilson," I said. The nurse glanced up, her expression neutral. "Are you family?" she asked. "We're divorced," I replied, but I was told she asked for me. Her face softened slightly as she pointed me toward the emergency department. I found James waiting outside the unit, pale and visibly shaken. When he saw me, he took a deep breath before speaking. "Jim," he began, his voice low and raw. "I'll get straight to the point. Kate is 6 months pregnant. The doctors say her health is failing, and the baby's at risk too. She hasn't been eating, hasn't been taking care of herself. They're both hanging by a thread." Pregnant. My thoughts reeled. I stared at him, trying to process this revelation. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "She wants to talk to you," he said. I nodded stiffly, following him into the room. Kate lay in the hospital bed, pale and frail, her face gaunt. Machines beeped softly around her, a stark reminder of her precarious state. I hesitated, then stepped closer. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of my approach, and she looked at me with tears pooling in her gaze. "Jim," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I didn't know I was pregnant. When I stopped eating, I thought I was only hurting myself. I didn't realize it was our baby." The words cut deep, shaking the walls of anger and resentment I'd built around myself. A darker question crept into my mind. Was the baby even mine? She seemed to sense my doubt because she added, "The baby's yours." I made Matt use protection every time. Before I could respond, her eyes closed, and the machines around her erupted into alarms. Nurses and doctors rushed in, urging me to leave. I stumbled into the hallway, overwhelmed by emotions I hadn't felt in months. Tears slipped down my face as I tried to regain control. James sat nearby, his shoulders slumped. He looked up at me with an expression of exhaustion and guilt. "I didn't know how to tell you, Jim," he said. "When I found out about the baby, I assumed it was Matt's. But Kate swore it wasn't. She said she never wanted children with anyone but you. I didn't feel it was my place to say anything." I nodded silently. He continued, "I've done my best to help her, but she's been falling apart." "Martha?" I asked. "Well, she's kept her distance. She hasn't forgiven Kate for what she did to you, and honestly, neither have I. But I couldn't just abandon her." "You've done more than most would," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're a good man, James." We sat in silence until a doctor approached hours later. "Are you next of kin?" he asked. He nodded. "Yes, you can speak freely." The doctor sighed. "The immediate crisis has passed, but it's still a fragile situation. The baby is small and underdeveloped, and Kate's condition remains critical. We're doing everything we can, but they're not out of the woods yet." He turned to me. "Are you the father?" I hesitated, then answered, "It seems so, but I only learned about the pregnancy today." The doctor nodded. "If the baby survives, a paternity test would confirm it. But I'll be honest with you, Kate's health is so poor that she may not make it through the next few months. You need to prepare for the possibility of raising this child alone." The weight of his words crushed me. I sat back, my mind racing through the implications. Was this truly my child? If it was, could I step up and shoulder the responsibility? Miraculously, both Kate and the baby held on. After weeks of intensive care, she gave birth prematurely to a baby boy. He was tiny, just over 4 pounds, but otherwise healthy. Kate's recovery was slower, and the damage to her health was irreversible, leaving the future uncertain. The results of the paternity test confirmed what I already suspected. I was the father. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Fatherhood was something I had once dreamed of, but under these circumstances it felt tainted. The joy I should have felt was buried under layers of anger and grief. Kate and I would never reconcile. That much was clear. Too much damage had been done, and no amount of apologies could repair what she'd destroyed. But the child was innocent, and I couldn't turn my back on him. As I held my son for the first time, I knew my life was about to change in ways I hadn't prepared for. This wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the one I had. And I would face it, no matter how complicated it became. A few days after the baby's birth, my phone rang again. It was James. His voice was cautious, almost hesitant. "Jim, I need to talk to you about the baby," he said. "Kate wants to know if you'd like to be involved in naming him." His words careful, as if he were trying to avoid setting off a minefield. I was caught off guard. Honestly, I hadn't even thought about it, I admitted. "We're divorced." I didn't expect to be part of that decision. James sighed lightly. "She mentioned she doesn't want to use your surname. She's thinking of using mine. Kelly, would you be okay with that?" I exhaled slowly, processing the suggestion. "James, I think that's a conversation you need to have with her, but don't you think I should meet him first?" There was a pause on the other end before James responded. "You're right, Jim. You should. Come by tonight around 7. I agreed, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity as the call ended. At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived at James's house. He greeted me at the door, his usual warm demeanor tempered by the strain of recent months. Martha appeared briefly, her face lined with exhaustion and worry. She hugged me lightly and whispered, "This isn't what we raised her to be, Jim." I nodded silently, and they left me alone with Kate and the baby. Kate looked up when I entered the room, her voice soft and uncertain. "Hi, Jim. Thanks for coming. Would you like to hold him?" I hesitated, unsure of how to feel. The baby wasn't to blame for any of this. Slowly, I stepped forward and took him into my arms. The moment I held him, something in me cracked. A rush of emotions, pain, regret, anger, and something deeper surged through me. His tiny face turned toward me, his eyes blinking as he gazed up. I felt my chest tighten, and against all odds, a small unexpected smile crept across my face. Kate noticed. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" she said softly, her own smile tentative. I nodded, unable to stop the wave of feelings crashing over me. Then, just as quickly, reality slammed back into place. My heart ached with the weight of what could have been. "Why, Kate?" I said, my voice breaking. "Why did you ruin us? We could have had everything. This could have been perfect." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I know, Jim. I made terrible mistakes. Mistakes I'll regret for the rest of my life. But can't you forgive me? Can't we try to fix this for him?" I felt the weight of her words and tried to pass the baby back to her, but she wouldn't take him. Her voice hardened slightly. "You're not a coward, Jim. You've never run from anything. Don't run from this." She motioned to the baby. "We need to talk. If not for us, then for him. At the very least, he deserves a name." I sat back down, holding my son as a heavy silence settled over the room. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke. "James Kelly Wilson," I said quietly. "How does that sound?" Kate's tears spilled over as she nodded. "I like it," she whispered. "The two best men in my life." Her words stung, but I let them slide. "Kate," I said, my voice low but firm, "I need you to understand something. I'll be in his life. I'll support him and do right by him, but I can't have you in mine. What you did, I can't forgive it. You shattered everything, and I can't live with someone I don't trust. I'll be here for our son, but that's where it ends." After selling my share of the business and repaying the loan that had tied me to my parents' financial guarantee, I used the remaining money to start over. Plumbing was all I knew, so I launched my own business, Jim Wilson Plumbing. I had my truck rebranded with a simple, bold tagline: former managing partner of JM Plumbing. If Matt had a problem with it, he never voiced it. Work poured in. My name still carried weight in the community, and soon I had more clients than I could handle. Financial stability wasn't an issue anymore, but my life felt hollow. I worked hard, set up child support for James Jr., and even started a college fund for him without consulting Kate. If he chose not to go to college, he'd receive the fund on his 25th birthday. Visits with my son became the only bright spot in my life. I made it clear to Kate that I wanted minimal contact with her. James, ever the peacemaker, often acted as a buffer, doing his best to navigate the fractured relationship between us. He remained a steady, kind presence, a man caught in a situation he never deserved. Kate, meanwhile, hovered at the edges of my life. Her apologies continued, but they rang hollow. I couldn't forgive her, couldn't let go of the betrayal that had shattered everything we'd built. The idea of a future with her was unthinkable. This was my life now, working hard, providing for my son, and existing in a limbo of unresolved emotions. I didn't know what the future held, but as I looked at James Jr., I realized one thing. As complicated as life had become, he was my reason to keep moving forward. For him, I could face whatever came next, even if forgiveness and closure were still far out of reach. 6 months later, James called me again, his voice quieter and heavier than usual. "Jim, I need to talk to you about Kate," he began. "She's struggling." It reminded me of how she'd been focused entirely on work, and James Jr. with nothing else to anchor her. She hadn't dated, hadn't even entertained the idea. She's rebuffed everyone, even Matt. "Matt?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Yeah," James said hesitantly. "He made a pass at her a couple of months ago. She shut it down immediately." The news stirred something I wasn't ready to confront. I had assumed Matt might eventually become her fallback, an easy option with no emotional investment. Maybe he thought he could bypass the niceties and offer her a convenient arrangement. The idea infuriated me, though I wasn't sure why. Hadn't I wanted them to suffer? Still, my concerns shifted to Kate's well-being. If she was spiraling again, it wasn't just about her. It was about James Jr. A part of me considered pursuing full custody, but the reality was sobering. I wasn't ready for full-time single parenthood. Not yet. The alternative was clearer, albeit harder to swallow. I needed to help Kate stay healthy, both for her sake and our son's. The problem was, every solution seemed to involve more interaction with her than I wanted. My pride balked at the idea of forgiving her or even being around her. Forgiveness felt like an impossible mountain to climb, but life rarely leaves room for stubborn pride. Not long after that call, James informed me he'd suffered a minor stroke. There was no permanent damage, but it was a warning, a glaring sign that he couldn't keep shouldering the weight of everyone's problems. Martha, still distant and wounded by Kate's betrayal, hadn't been much help. James had been holding everything together at the expense of his own health. Now it was clear that I had to step up. We held what James jokingly called a non-family family meeting. It was time to reassess responsibilities. Kate agreed to stick to her medication and prioritize her role as a mother. Martha reluctantly promised to be more supportive of James. As for me, I agreed to take a more active role, not just as a father, but as a co-parent who could help ease the burden on James. The decision left a bitter taste in my mouth. I still felt betrayed, but James Jr. was my priority. Being his father meant setting aside my resentment and showing up, not just when it was convenient, but consistently. I began helping in practical ways. Twice a week, I brought meals to their house, staying through the evening until James Jr. was asleep. On weekends, I prepared simple dinners, meatloaf, pasta, or roast chicken. I wasn't a great cook, but no one was complaining. And my meatloaf actually turned out better than I expected. These regular visits forced me to interact with Kate more than I wanted to. At first, our conversations were awkward and short, often limited to updates about James Jr., but over time, something shifted. We began talking about him with genuine interest, sharing stories about his milestones and habits. Slowly, the resentment I carried began to soften, not enough to forget, but enough to see her as a person again. I also took it upon myself to make sure she stayed on our medication. Small gestures like checking in or bringing groceries seemed to help her feel supported. Gradually, she began emerging from the cloud of depression. Watching her regain some semblance of herself made me question the coldness I'd shown her for so long. She had hurt me, yes, but had I been right to treat her like an irredeemable pariah? I thought about all she had endured since our divorce. She'd lost her home, her independence, and the love she said she cherished most. She hadn't dated, isolating herself instead. Meanwhile, I had fought back. I'd built a business, reclaimed my independence, and ensured Matt paid for his betrayal in every possible way. But was Kate's punishment supposed to go further than his? Had she not already suffered enough? Then there was James Jr., the innocent child caught in the aftermath of our mistakes. He didn't deserve parents at war, and he didn't deserve to lose his mother to her struggles. James's stroke had been a wake-up call. He had sacrificed his health trying to keep everyone afloat, and I couldn't let that continue. It was time to take responsibility, not just for my son, but for the family dynamic we'd all been forced into. The following Saturday, I arrived at James and Martha's house earlier than usual. I wanted time to speak with Kate alone. James and Martha, understanding my intentions, left with James Jr., giving us the space we needed. "Kate," I began, keeping my tone steady. "We need to talk. Things as they are right now aren't sustainable. James's health is fragile, and he doesn't need the added stress of having you and James Jr. under his roof while I'm here 3 nights a week. It's too much." Her expression flickered with curiosity. "Oh, what are you saying?" she asked cautiously. "I'm saying we need a different arrangement," I replied. "You, James Jr., and I need to find a place to live together." Her eyes widened, and I saw the flicker of hope I had been careful to avoid encouraging. "Don't misunderstand me," I continued firmly. "This would be a practical, platonic arrangement. I haven't forgotten what you and Matt did, and I doubt I ever will. This isn't about you. It's about James Jr. and making life easier for all of us, especially your father." The hope in her expression dimmed, but she nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for thinking of this." "This isn't for you, Kate," I reiterated. "This is for James Jr. and James Sr., but we have to make it work, for everyone's sake." I paused, letting my words sink in before adding firmly. "I've also realized that someone needs to ensure you stay consistent with your medication, and I'm willing to be that person, for James Jr.'s sake. He deserves to have both parents in his life. But let me make this clear, if you ever start a relationship with someone else, this arrangement ends immediately. We're divorced, Kate. I'm not here to be your babysitter while you date. Is that something you can accept and live with?" Kate's expression softened, a small but genuine smile breaking through despite the boundaries I had laid down. "Yes, Jim," she said earnestly. "I'll agree to anything to be with you, and James Jr. every day. I understand your rules, and I'll respect them. But I want to be honest. I'll still try to win you back, not by pushing or being inappropriate, but by being the kind of partner you deserve. If you never change your mind, I'll accept that. But I'll always love you, Jim." And with that, the 3 of us moved into a modest 3-bedroom house. It was a tense and unconventional arrangement. 2 people with a complicated past, navigating a platonic partnership for the sake of their child. For me, living with James Jr. full-time was both a joy and a challenge. He was a happy, curious little boy, and his resilience amazed me. By 10 months, he was wobbling around on unsteady legs, and by 14 months, he had mastered a handful of words. Every milestone reminded me why this arrangement mattered. From the outside, we might have appeared like a normal family. We cooked meals together, managed the chaos of toddlerhood, and shared a roof. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. Kate and I had separate bedrooms, and those spaces became sanctuaries where we coped with the frustrations of our arrangement. I wasn't bound to celibacy by my own rules, but something kept me from seeking a relationship elsewhere. If I ever pursued someone, I resolved, it would be entirely outside the world we had created for James Jr. Over time, James's health improved. Relieved of the constant stress of managing Kate and James Jr.'s lives, he regained his strength. Martha, too, seemed to emerge from the emotional fog that had hung over her since Kate's infidelity. For a while, it seemed as if the storm had passed and our lives settled into an uneasy routine. But that kind of balance couldn't last forever. Kate, though outwardly composed, struggled beneath the surface. She adhered to the boundaries I had set, but the emotional toll of our arrangement weighed on her. She missed true closeness, and I couldn't deny that the tension in our home was palpable. As much as I hated to admit it, I felt it too. One evening, Kate broke the silence that had hung between us for months. "Jim," she said, her voice calm but laced with vulnerability. "I love you. I know you don't want to hear it, but I do. I've watched you growing more restless, and it scares me. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. These past months have been a gift, being with you and James Jr. again. But this half-life is hurting both of us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Without responding, I grabbed my keys and left the house. It was the first time since we had moved in together that I walked out before James Jr. was asleep. My thoughts churned as I drove aimlessly, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Eventually, I ended up at the staging post, the bar I hadn't visited in over a year. The familiarity of the place brought a bitter taste to my mouth, especially when I spotted Matt's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Before I could leave, he turned and saw me. His face lit up in a way that only deepened my irritation. "Jim," he said, walking toward me cautiously, his smile tentative. "Let me buy you a drink." I glared at him, the anger I thought I had buried flaring to the surface. "Get lost, Matt," I said coldly. "I have nothing to say to you." He dropped his hand, his expression tinged with regret. "I get it," he said. "You've got every reason to hate me. But Jim, I'm glad to see you're doing okay. I heard you and Kate are living together again." "That's great. I'm happy for you." "Happy?" I scoffed. "We're not together. We're not married, and we never will be, thanks to you." Matt flinched but didn't argue. "Jim," he said quietly, "I know I can't undo what I did. After the divorce, I tried to make things work with Kate. I thought maybe we could have something real, but she turned me down. She told me you're the only man she's ever loved." His words stopped me cold. He continued, his voice steady but subdued. "She told me she'd never love anyone else. She said she'd wait for you, no matter how long it took. I've made a mess of everything, Jim, but if there's one thing I know, it's that she still loves you." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and left, his words echoing in my mind. When I got home, the house was dark and quiet. I called for Kate softly, not wanting to wake James Jr., but there was no reply. Her bedroom door was closed. I knocked lightly, then pushed it open to find her curled up on the bed, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Without hesitation, I walked over and sat beside her. Kicking off my shoes, I slid under the covers and pulled her trembling body against mine. She didn't resist, her tears soaking into my shirt. After a long silence, I tilted her face toward me and kissed her deeply. Her breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. "Jim," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you." I kissed her again, softer this time, and then pulled back to meet her gaze. "If you ever betray me again," I said quietly, "I won't forgive you ever." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I won't," she whispered, "never again. I love you, Jim. Always." For the first time in years, I let my guard down. I didn't know if it was forgiveness, exhaustion, or something in between, but the barriers I had built around my heart began to crumble. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Life has a way of forcing us to confront what we'd rather leave buried. As I held Kate that night, I realized that rebuilding isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to face the pain and move forward anyway. Trust is fragile and hard to mend, but James Jr. deserved a chance at a whole family, even if it came with scars. Kate and I weren't perfect, and we never would be, but perhaps perfection wasn't the goal. Instead, it was about being present, learning, growing, and making better choices. For the first time in a long while, I saw a glimmer of hope. Not the naive hope of starting fresh, but a tempered one. A hope born from the cracks and flaws, stronger because of them. The path ahead would be far from easy, but as I kissed my son goodnight and returned to Kate's side, I chose to take that first step. For James Jr., for us, and for whatever future we could build, one day at a time.